Today's financial advice is sponsored by Endeavor Private Wealth. Well, Chris McGee, managing partner, Endeavor Private Wealth, has joined us for a segment on investing. Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, Chris, we have two more programs before 2023 goes into the history books. Looking back at the year, what were some of the biggest takeaways, kind of lessons learned, and surprises? And don't worry, you have all about 4 minutes to address everything here.
Well, challenge accepted. On a couple conditions. Let's focus on the first half of 2023 this week, and then I'll cover the second half next week. And I'll do it under the framework which I refer to as I, E, G, and R to highlight, in my opinion, some of the key topics.
All right, sounds reasonable. Okay, so please proceed, Chris.
So I stands for interest rates and inflation, which absolutely dominated the financial news. At the start of the year, inflation was down from its peak of 9.1% in the summer of the prior year, but it was still running too hot for consumers and the Federal Reserve's likings. Committed to restoring price stability, the Fed continued the process of increasing interest rates, although at a slightly less aggressive pace. The expectation that rates would increase at a slower pace, rising substantially higher and staying there for longer, pretty much played out just like the Fed suggested, and inflation has continued to trend downward, albeit with an occasional glitch or hiccups.
And so now I'm curious as to what your E in IEGR represents.
It represents the enormous field of interest from equities, the U.S. economy, employment, energy, and even the electoral function or maybe dysfunction. This year began with equity indexes like the S&P 500, the tech-heavy NASDAQ, and small-cap Russell 2000, all down significantly over the prior 12 months. And the Dow Jones Index was down too, although not quite as much as the others. Worried about an impending recession were persistent, and overall decline in corporate earnings created a really somber mood for stocks. One bright spot, however, was employment, and the U.S. economy continued to create jobs, and the unemployment rate remained historically low. But that caused the Fed to worry about the possibility of a wage price spiral, which would impede its efforts to tame inflation.
Wow, okay. So next up, please tell us about the G in your framework.
So G stands for global issues. And for the first part of the year, the two dominant stories were the war in Ukraine, as well as the geopolitical and economic interactions between China, the U.S., and the rest of the world. U.S. and NATO support for Ukraine was unwavering, with the hopes that the Ukraine's counteroffensive could turn the tide of the war. Russia appeared to be reeling, but that all changed very quickly. China, this world's second largest economy, ironically began the year crawling out of self-imposed domestic restrictions caused by COVID, but stumbled to find its own footing. Although that didn't stop them from being an imperial pain to the U.S. on multiple fronts. Starting the year with the spy balloon, continuing to harass Taiwan, and then cozying up with its strategic partner Russia, and doing whatever it could to kind of gain an advantage wherever it could.
Okay, now you've covered I, E, and G. What do you have in mind for R now?
So R is something I'm always thinking about, and that's risk. Or should I say multiple types of risk. As important as it is to be attuned to the micro or macro financial conditions, I believe it's even more important to understand the lock between specific ways to manage portfolio, non-portfolio, and behavioral risk that are unique to each investor's current situation and long-term financial goals.
Okay, so now quickly, we're a little short on time now. Can you give us a few examples of each?
Sure. So interest rate risk have me focusing on managing duration risk and the inverse relationship between the direction of interest rates and the price of the underlying fixed income security. Most investors don't like big swings in the value of their investment portfolio, so I spend a lot of time thinking about ways to structure portfolios to minimize volatility risk while still seeking to achieve the client's investment objectives. And then non-portfolio risk deals with planning for events that are personal to each investor, most commonly associated with longevity or long-term care risk. And the effects of aging or the loss of a loved one has almost nothing to do with the financial markets, but without proper planning, they can have a very negative financial consequences on individuals and their families. And then there's behavioral risk that influence that human emotions and the feelings have on decision making, which can fly in the face of logic and reason. By understanding and explaining how these risks present themselves and the steps that can be taken to improve financial decisions.
Wow. Well, Chris, as always, we appreciate your time. And I know we're all looking forward for next week when we'll discuss the second half of the year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course, everybody, to learn more about Endeavor Private Wealth, visit EndeavorPW.com.